welcome back, everybody, to the Triad of the Force podcast, a Puerto Rican podcast where we do deep dives into Star Wars and other nerd related media. Welcome again to our Thursday acolytes, where the sun is setting on our reviews as we approach the end game of this series. And today we're very excited to talk about episode 7, Choice, the complement to episode 3, Destiny. And to help us break it all down and review it, we have someone that we have been wanting to talk to for a very long time. Welcome to the channel to Darth Choco. Darth, welcome to the channel.
Yeah, thank you so much for bringing me on, and yeah, I'm excited to get in here and talk Star Wars. I gotta say I have a lot of strong feelings about this episode, and so I'm happy this is one I get to join you on.
Great. No, and we've been wanting to have you like for a while now, but between strikes for Ahsoka and life and
Yeah,
everything that's been happening, like I know like the planets haven't aligned, so to speak, right, for to have you here. But thankfully, uh the finally we're here, and it's definitely a good one, and it's interesting one to talk about specifically, I think, because of how it in a way directly ties to fandom, right? With not just the what's happening with Acolyte and fandom as a whole, but what's happening with fandom specifically with this episode. And we'll talk a little bit about it further once we get into it. But as a new friend of the channel and someone who's like new on the podcast, we always like to do like a little portion to kind of get to know you, especially for people that are listening to our podcast who might not be familiar with you and the work that you do. And just, briefly tell us a little bit about Darth Choco. Tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into Star
yeah,
Wars, and what's your relationship with how talk about Star Wars these days.
yeah. So again, Darth Choco on YouTube, Darth Choco on TikTok, Darth Choco IG on Instagram. I don't go to Instagram as often as I should. I'm sorry. Darth Choco 7 on Twitter, but Twitter is awful. Let's be
Yeah,
honest.
Twitter.
um, I refuse to call it X. But anyways, yeah, I just love Star Wars. My relationship with it is like it's deep. It's my obsession with it has run since I was a child. Back in the day, had like a VHS tape of uh of Empire Strikes Back that I just watched over and over and over again until the tape
Mm.
got destroyed. And then around that time is when the special editions started coming out. So I did get to
Right.
watch the saga in theaters as a kid, and then obviously into the prequels. I fell out of it for a little bit, right?
Hmm.
I loved the prequels, and everyone I knew hated the prequels so much that it was
Yep.
insufferable, and I couldn't even. I okay, to be honest, I pretended like I hated them too. I just went around with
Hey,
it.
I did that too. I don't blame you. We all fell to the dark side. Temptation's strong. The flesh is weak, so totally understand that.
Exactly. But yeah, just as time, went on, I started reading a lot of the books. I'm a massive Legends fan. Um, and God, I've read so many goddamn books. And so like and I ended up with a job where I was doing a lot of physical labor for most of the day. So I had headphones in, so I'd listen to all these Star Wars podcasts and all this stuff. And then I realized that there's a few of them I was listening to where after reading the books, I was like, these guys don't know what they're talking about.
Hmm.
So that kind of changed things, and so I just did my own thing and just read stuff. Then once we had a canon books started up, had mixed feelings about the sequel trilogy. I love The Last Jedi. That's
Hmm.
actually my favorite Star Wars film.
Hmm.
Um, don't like The Rise of Skywalker, and um the and Force Awakens is just in the middle for me,
Hmm.
so it's spread all over. So yeah, I mean, my relationship with fandom right now and with Star Wars is I like what I like. I don't like what I don't like. Um,
Hmm.
if I don't like a show, I'll stick with it for a couple episodes. I'll review those episodes, and if I don't like it, I just stop watching it. I don't know. so
Hmm.
so
Hmm.
a wild idea. Because of this, sometimes I get accused of liking everything. It's not true. I just don't. It's an amazing time to be a geek right now.
Mhm.
And
Yep,
between
exactly.
anime, between we got the boys, we got the House of the Dragon going on. We're about to have the new Batman series drop.
Rings
There's
of
a
Powers
Suicide
coming out. Yep.
there's so much. I can't spend time on something I don't enjoy. There's just not I don't have it in me. So that's kind of my relationship with it. The Acolyte I've really enjoyed so far. I actually loved this past episode because this
Good.
last episode for me is The Last Jedi.
Yeah,
It's The
very
Last
much.
Jedi Acolyte version. Um but throughout the whole series, there's been some, acting choices, line delivery, just certain things that I haven't vibed with.
Mhm.
Overall, I'm still in it though.
I mean, that's great to hear. I think that's the and we've talked about it almost ad nauseum on this podcast about the healthy ways, right, in which to engage with not just Star Wars, but anything in life, not just fandom, but anything, friends, family, movies, TV shows. It's like you have to watch out for your mental health, and you have to watch out for what makes you happy and what makes you miserable. And if something isn't doing it for you, to hate watch or just uh, engage in toxicity and negativity, it's exhausting and it's just not worth it. It's one of those things where, like you said, we live in a extremely privileged time in terms of
Right?
media and storytelling, where like 20 years ago, when when I was in high school and middle school, yeah, we had stories and we had, well, the books and shows, but it wasn't to the amount and with the access that we have nowadays. And to kind of split hairs about having the one show not connect with you perfectly when there's so many other things to kind of choose from, it's it's telling. I think it's and not worth it.
No.
Just choose something else and be happy. I just keep going back to Kevin Smith's video, that reel or TikTok that came out a couple weeks ago about him saying after he had his heart attack, he realized that it's not worth it to spend your time just talking about the things you hate and why you hate them, and instead talking about the things you
I
love.
actually didn't see that. I didn't see that, but I've often wondered, like, because I recently had some weirdo try to like attack me and stuff.
Mhm.
But I wonder what these people's like blood pressure is like. You know what
Yeah,
I mean? Like,
yeah, yeah.
it can't be good for you. It can't be good for your spouse if you have one. It can't be. I don't know.
I mean, it gets even a little exhausting just talking too joyfully sometimes with other people. It's just like, okay, my God, you like something too much. Imagine the opposite end of the spectrum where you're just like being so toxic, but then exactly going out of your way to rain on someone's parade that's actually enjoying something. It's just like, just let other people be happy or block them or mute them, and then you don't have to see their joy. I don't know. It's definitely very strange. And I think that this episode, which I enjoy very much, is the episode that we have been waiting for this whole season. It's just like, what's the other side of the
Mhm.
story? Has been interesting, not just for the things that happen with it, but also for the fandom response that there has been to it, because it's been interesting because a lot of the backlash that I've seen, and I don't know what your experience with the Acolyte has been thus far, but a lot of the backlash that I've seen for Acolytes, usually, the fandom menace and like all the people that
No,
already decided that they weren't going to like the show before the show came out.
no,
And we expected that those voices are what we expect them to be. But these past couple, like this today and yesterday after the show came out, it's been interesting to see quote unquote infighting between the people that have been enjoying the show over how they've been interpreting it, which I think it's one really healthy, right? That we're uh,
yeah,
analyzing the show in different ways and seeing different points of view, but also, in a way, it's also disheartening because it's kind of like you're falling into the trap that the show is preaching against, which is like, don't fall victim to your point of view, because that's what happened to Saul, that's what happened to May, and all these characters that were so focused on seeing things from, like Obi-Wan said, like from their own point of view, that they forgot to see the choice, how their choices impact the quote unquote destinies of others. So it's one of those things where, like, yeah, talking in earnest about how someone else sees something is beautiful, but then also getting angry because someone else interpreted a little different from how you did is a little odd. So I want to kind of start with that, since we've been
Mhm.
just talking about this whole fandom angle of everything. I just wanted to get your input on how you've reacted to how the narrative of the episode has been so far.
To be quite honest, I haven't seen a lot of it. I've seen a
Lucky
bunch of
you.
weird takes. I've seen a bunch of weird takes about Torben specifically. Um, but that's kind of the only thing. Oh, sorry. There's two things I've been seeing. So in regards to Torben, they're saying someone said that it didn't make sense that he was even a Jedi because of how he acted, and I was like,
What?
that's how all Padawans act. That's how Obi-Wan acted.
Mhm.
If you took Anakin Skywalker and you said you're gonna be examining plants on this
Mhm.
planet,
Mhm.
you can't tell me he wouldn't throw a fit, he wouldn't have an
Yep.
attitude,
Yep.
he
Yep.
wouldn't look for any angle to go run off and do something. Like that's super normal. And I also I mean I feel very strongly that's the point of his character.
Mhm.
Like
Mhm.
even looks like a Skywalker, like
Mhm.
physically. And I think that was intentionally done so that you can connect with, okay, so this is, Luke on Tatooine just wanting to run off and have an adventure,
Right. Right. Right.
and when his aunt and uncle died, she shed no tears. He was like, "I'm free."
Mhm.
Which
Mhm.
is
Mhm.
kinda weird. But, yeah, I feel very strong that that's the whole point of his character is that impetuousness, of youth. And I really love that this episode, just like The Last Jedi, took the tropes that are so common that they've been beaten to death and it turned them on their ear, right?
Mhm.
Typically it's, oh no, there's someone's holding you back, and then it's your rebellion that was the good thing. And that's not always the case, I think about Qui-Gon resting the weight of the entire planet of Naboo on the
Mhm.
shoulders of
Mhm.
this kid who's never finished a pod race,
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
racing his homemade, you know what I mean? Like if you had a 9-year-old, would you bet your whole house on him winning like the Indy 500
Right.
in a car that he built himself? Um,
Right.
like it could go very bad very quickly. That's all I'm saying. And it's interesting to see what happens when it does. Now, the other thing I've been seeing is people complaining because when Soul runs in to the room where the girls are, he holds up the two platforms and he
Mhm.
holds them up as long as he can. And then he lets one go so he can focus on just the other one, and he still has to run up and catch her physically.
Mhm.
And I hear people say, "Well, why didn't he just pull the two girls off?" And you're like, I get that complaint, but people make suboptimal choices all the time.
Mhm.
That's
Mhm.
normal. That's natural. And it's not like this guy, like we know from the rest of Star Wars what it's like to be a Force user.
Mhm.
We know that there are limits to your strength, there are limits to your stamina, there are limits to your focus, and we know how tied to your emotions your abilities are. This dude climbed a
Mhm.
goddamn mountain. You see how big I was like, first of all, ain't no human climbing that.
Right.
And then once once he got up there, he had to fight. He, yeah, he had to fight instantly.
Mhm.
He also killed the girl's mom, which tore his heart, to pieces and made
Mhm.
him feel
Mhm.
super guilty. He fought the Zabrak woman. Then he had to fight Kilnaka, which I don't know if you noticed, that was not easy for
No.
anyone. Not to mention that's your friend. And then he had to run through the bodies of a coven of witches to get to the
Mhm.
girl. Like dude was not bringing his A game in that moment. Then he turned the corner and saw they were falling and caught those. Dude was wiped, and
Mhm.
that made sense to me. And maybe if he was fresh, he would have decided to just sweep him off. But also, I think it's also just easier to catch something big like that and not have to focus on something small to catch. Um, that's another thing we kind of see with the force is that it's the more articulate thing you're doing is more
Mhm.
difficult than a big thing.
Right. And it's one of those things where, like, I don't even worry about because I'm just like, there's a reason why we have an adage, right? That says hindsight's 2020. It's like, yeah, like if you from third person point of view looking back, easy to do every decision perfectly because
Right?
the people that say that like in sports, are you perfect? Like, yeah, do you throw the 3 pointer when no one's like, it's like in the heat of the moment, anything can happen. And there's also the fact that there's, narrative reasonings for doing some things. And I understand why maybe the there's a million ways to justify why someone didn't do something, but in this case, I think the explanation is like there's the visual storytelling of how we're talking about his sin of letting one twin go and saving the other, and there's just a visual aspect
Yeah.
to it of how to convey that in a more poetic sense, and I think it's kind of like what
We
George Lucas
forget that
says. It's
as
the
like
rule of cool. It's
yeah.
what has more visual impact. And if he had saved both of them, that we wouldn't have the story. The point is that he didn't save them, and not he didn't save them because he didn't try. It's because he made a decision to let one go and save the other. And I
I
think
mean, the episode's called Choice, you know?
right. So if he hadn't had to make that choice, there wouldn't be any point to it. So I don't know. It's weird. I think all the ways that people engage with storytellings nowadays is very disingenuous. I think it's also very just how they've been used to seeing stories now. It's like this hyper rational, grounded reality of like how every story needs to be, and then every story has to be Westworld, where the next episode has to have a mind bending plot twist. And I'm just like, that not every story is that way. Some stories are fantasy, and some stories are not necessarily about the rational logic of a situation, but more about the emotional logic of a situation. And this show has definitely been more about the latter, right? About the emotional aspect of
Yeah.
how all these characters are reckoning with their past and how that affects their present right now. So I mean, I think that's just a good segue to then start talking about this episode because, yeah, we're kind of starting from the end backwards. Obviously, the episode crescendos into Soul's choice, and we know that throughout the whole of the season, we know that something happened on Brendock. We saw one point of view in episode 3, Destiny, and now we finally got to see that other point of view, Rashomon style, like Leslie has been talking about in her interviews, how she's structured the series. And we know that the Jedi did something wrong. We know that they did something that they're ashamed of. We know it's something that was so bad that May needs to confront all of them, and so bad that Torben had to unalive himself for it. So I guess right off the bat, do you think that this episode delivered on the promise of what the Jedi did wrong on Brendock? Were the mysteries that were teased to be answered on this episode satisfying for you?
I mean, I can only speak for myself, but absolutely. I mean, justice for Indara first and
Mhm,
foremost,
mhm,
because Leslie made me hate Indara for these first 7 episodes. Like, I thought she was this. She was like like the Jedi don't kidnap kids, but the way it was portrayed is you're
mhm,
like, it sounds like she wants to, and
mhm,
like it made Soul like, oh, he's out of the goodness of his heart. He's just a bleeding heart, wants to do the best he can. But obviously he had some issues as well. But I love that when we got to see Soul's perspective,
mhm,
everything he saw was these kids are in danger. These kids are in danger. These kids are in danger. And I mean, what more noble cause is there than protect children, right? Protect these children. For all he knew, these witches were gonna like boil them up and eat them. Like there were no other kids there. I
mhm,
think
mhm,
that's
mhm,
probably a red flag. And by the way, there was still some nefarious stuff afoot. Even if Mother Anastasia seems, to be really nice and was going to let her go, um, there's some stuff going on, and I feel, I mean, I have my own, predictions about that, but yeah, I mean, I largely feel like this was an attempt to create an artificial dyad. I think I think the goal was to have 2 people use essence transfer, on each of the kids and use that so that you were in a dyad with this other person, because you would be 2 beings that are one within the Force, as we find out that their, symbionts are
Mhm.
the same. Um, and when she did her spookiness,
Mhm, mhm, mhm,
May started to disappear as well, and so that also makes me wonder how I have a lot of questions about what they're doing and how it works, but my mind keeps going back to something Yord says,
mhm,
and when he's like, he gets in your head and he stays there, and I don't think Torben was right after whatever happened to him was let go, and the way the Coven died after being forcefully separated from Kilnaka
mhm,
leads me to believe that this was essence transferred. Like they literally put a portion of their soul in him to control him. And so
mhm.
when that was severed, you can't walk around with half a soul.
One way I read, I don't know if it was like on Threads or Twitter or what, but one way I read it being described, because at least for me, and it's one of the, I really liked the episode. It didn't hit on all cylinders on everything, but I really liked it overall. But I think one of the things that I wasn't particularly sold on, and it's because I'm pretty sure that the next episode is gonna probably answer all of my concerns.
Mhm.
It's like this the mystery of the coven's power, and we see like you were mentioning, Anasea like turning into like the black mist that also started turning May into it. Obviously, Coral disappears through that, and then the mind meld or whatever we're gonna call it between all the witches and Kalnaka. And one of the ways I saw someone like liken it as I was trying to find answers for what's happening here was that it's kind of like the Matrix, right? They're plugged into, which is appropriate, right? Because it's Carrie Ann
Yeah.
Moss's character and Dara doing the unplugging, but it's like they're plugged into the Matrix of Kamnaka's mind, and then just Indara just unplug them, and you can't unplug them without leaving the consciousness. So their consciousness in Kalnaka and their bodies just don't function without it, and that's why Kalnaka's just in Kofar going crazy. Well, allegedly going crazy, drawing
I
the
mean,
coven symbol.
drawing tons of symbols and stuff like that. I mean, I have to believe that the portion of each of them that was left in there is probably still in there. He just was no longer being suppressed.
Hmm.
Yeah, dude was not okay for sure.
And I
Yeah, and oh, good.
no no please continue.
No, I just wanted to shout out that fight because, you know, if they had tried to take over anyone else, it would not have been as big of a threat. But like
Hmm. Hmm.
a Wookiee 1v2ing everyone because you can't just block a Wookiee's lightsaber, right? He's gonna hit it through your own body, and the way he still fought with his claws and all that stuff
Hmm.
was pretty gnarly.
And it's one of the great payoffs because we obviously are sold throughout the series the Wookiee Jedi, and seeing a Wookiee Jedi in action, and then when we see that he's been cut down by Chimere and in Kofar, everyone's just disappointed that we never got to see the
Right.
fight. But then it kind of delivered in spades in a way, because it when we see that moment, it's just like, oh, but we never got to we want to see it even more than, so the fact that we see it in the way that it occurred, right, in this episode was, I think, very satisfying, because he's not just fighting an enemy, which would be awesome, but also, cliche, right? The good guy fights the enemy. That's fine. But then seeing the good guy fight his friends in such a
Hmm.
vicious way, I think really really worked, and in a way that, like I said, then starts setting up more questions about what's happening, because he's not just defeated by combat, he's defeated in a way that then knocks out all the coven. So like, what does that mean for the story going forward? And we'll get to speculation in a bit, because I think there's so much open for the next episode that hope, I mean, I know that they'll wrap it up, because every single Star Wars show, I'm just like, how are they gonna wrap up everything in one episode? And then they do it. So
And then they do, yeah.
I'm not worried. It's one of those things where, do I wish? And I want to ask you this now. Now that I'm just uh, saying it out loud, Do I wish that this show was Andor length and have like 12 episodes? I mean, I'd be happy with 10, but 12 episodes like Andor, yes, because I feel like eight. One, I'm greedy, so I want more. But it also feels like eight is too short. So, like, how have you felt with now that the story's almost over and we've kind of seen a lot of it? How have you felt about the pacing of the show and the length of the season so far?
It's interesting. Um, so one thing, it's interesting when Star Wars fans brings up pacing because I think Star Wars is bad pacing, just
Mhm,
in general. I think, um, I mean, yeah, you look at A New Hope, and you forget how much of the time is spent wandering in the desert before anything
mhm,
actually happens.
mhm,
Um, the whole beginning of Return of the Jedi uh is weird and disconnected from the whole rest of the movie. Which I love those films, by the way. I'm just,
mhm.
this just seems to be a common thing,
Right,
and
you
I
can't
think
nitpick
that,
something from one thing and then let it go on something else, type of thing. You have to take it
yeah,
all as, collectively.
exactly. And I argue that The Force Awakens has the best pacing of any Star Wars movie.
Mhm,
But with this show, the pacing has been. I don't know that I need more episodes, but I need longer episodes.
mhm.
I think
Yes.
if every episode could have been extended to like 45 minutes, then we would have gotten. I think we would feel better about everything.
Yeah.
Um, I have a hard thing when it comes to pacing or the amount of episodes because I feel like they've done a good job of introducing a question, and then the next episode answers. First episode introduced like four questions. Next episode answers two questions, but adds two more.
Right.
And then we kind of leapfrog over these answers and questions and answers and questions. And I think it's done a pretty good job of that.
Mhm,
The only thing that was bothering me was what happened on Brendock because
mhm.
I mean, so was like, "I'll tell you next episode," and then the
Yeah,
next
yeah,
episode, "I'll
yeah,
tell
yeah.
you next episode. I'll tell you in 1 second. Let me just do this really quick," and then you're like, "Okay, all right."
I
And that was I
saw
was
I
like,
saw some people. Sorry to cut you off, but I had seen some people saying that this episode needed to happen like much sooner in the season. I totally disagree. I think one of the great payoffs of the show is like the build up towards that. But yeah,
"Yeah."
what were you going to
I
say there?
think and I think this episode had to be this.
Mhm.
I would have been mad if it went any further, but I was like, but they teased us, and sometimes you got to pay extra for that.
Yeah.
Um, but the payoff, I don't know, the payoff was worth it. I also loved the conversation, the complex conversation surrounding the Jedi that has been introduced by this show,
Mhm.
especially by this episode, because I love the Jedi. I've seen a lot of Jedi hate in the
Mhm.
fandom
Yep. Yep.
as of
Yep.
late,
Mhm.
but like to me, a lot of the hate is people mad at whatever religion they grew up in, and they just
Mhm.
transpose that on top of the Jedi,
That's a good
and it
point.
has
Yep.
nothing to do with anything the Jedi have ever done or said or any of that. Um, and so I think this thing had a really good did a really good job of showing how the Jedi are altruistic.
Mhm.
They are doing their best to make the right
Mhm.
decisions,
Mhm.
and everyone's choice. Um, they thought they were doing something good,
Mhm.
but in the end, it just you have your intentions, and then you have the fallout of what happens based off of your intentions. And it doesn't mean that you shouldn't have good intentions because bad things can happen anyways. No, you
Right.
still try your damnedest to do the right thing, but it's just you know you just have to know that it's not always going to work out. And I mean, do you think Saul should have told him on himself to the council? And how would that affect OSHA? Was that the right decision?
I mean, I think, and it's interesting because I was going to ask you that question a little further down the line because it's one of those philosophical questions, right? Like, if it's is it worth it to base a good thing off of a lie or like do a bad deed for like a good result? And for me personally, like I think the interesting thing about all of this is that it's not. binary, right? And I think that that's what the whole show has been getting to. It's like there is like no one is necessarily right or wrong about anything. I'm not saying that there's middle ground. That's not what I'm trying to say at all. I mean, goodness is always the preferred path to anything, but sometimes goodness isn't easy, and sometimes the easy thing is the hard thing, and sometimes what seems to be the right thing is not necessarily isn't necessarily so. But ultimately I do think that Saul need I mean I think that he needed to tell the truth, because
Yeah.
now he is propagating his sin to other people, because even though Indara was the one that was for the most part in the right throughout the whole of the episode by saying like we should just respect their culture and just let them do what they're doing and just stay out of it and all these things, which I think she was absolutely right on everything. At the end she messes up by saying like, well, now we're in it too deep and now I have to get dirty too, and now my sin has to be the cover up. So now she instigates the cover up and doesn't allow Soul to make his choice, which I think is the interesting thing, because a lot of people have been talking about this episode about choices we make, and I think that the for me the interesting thing about the episode is not so much about choices we make, but choices that are denied to us. And
Interesting.
May and Osha didn't have a choice in anything. Soul all of a sudden like doesn't have a choice when Indara takes it away from her. I mean, technically he does, but you know what I'm saying? Like the whole episode is about how someone else imposes themselves on someone else, so that all of a sudden like their decision doesn't matter so much. So it's complex, right? Because it's the thing that is Indara's justification for telling him not to confront the council, which is like, well, this whole mess was to protect her, and now to protect Osha, her whole family's dead. So if you are under arrest by the Jedi, now she's alone in the world. So it's again noble, but it's what Mother Anastasia said at the beginning. Nobility is going to bring the destruction of all of your things.
Um,
And if there's one phrase, right, that captures, I think the 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 thesis of the episode is the road to hell is paved with good intentions, because that's what this whole episode has been. It's like everyone trying to do the good thing, the right thing, but if it's not the right thing for honest reasons or the right thing done rightly, then I think that no one has, there aren't necessarily the best consequences from it. Do you think he
yeah.
should have gone to the High Council? Flip it back on you.
Well, I mean, it's a conversation that should be had, and I think he should have done it, but I don't think that was the time to do it.
Mhm, mhm,
So yes, I actually do agree with him taking OSHA as a Padawan, and for a period of time. And then after a while, he's got to come forward and let people know, like I want to make sure she was stable and okay
mhm,
and in a safe environment. I mean, I would have honestly, I would have been pulling a fast one on the Jedi, just in general.
mhm,
Of
mhm,
like, I've already trained this girl partially, so like now, yeah, we got to take care of her, right? So now
mhm,
place her somewhere, and then I'll take whatever consequences I get. Um, but they not coming out with the truth destroyed all of their
mhm,
lives,
mhm,
destroyed everyone, and that's what happens when you lie. You remove your ability to relax,
mhm, mhm,
right? You that's why I tell like people like don't ever cheat on your spouse or anything like that because now
mhm,
you can't come home and relax.
right.
You've removed your ability to not always be on or something like that. And so, yeah, none of them ever got any reprieve from their actions, and they probably could have gotten help in some form or
Mhm,
fashion had they come forward. So, yeah, yeah, I mean that's kind of how I feel about it. One of the things that it made me think of instantly, though, was you watched Tales of the Jedi.
mhm, yeah.
So I love Mace Windu. He gets
Mhm.
a lot of crap in the community. Uh,
Ever since he
And
said citizen, people have turned against him.
right? I but he wasn't wrong, but he's always right. That's the thing that
Mhm.
bothers me is he's always right. But like we had the episode of him and Dooku where
Mhm,
Master Catchy had died. They were sent to get the body. Obviously, the people's story didn't match up, so something happened. And Mace Windu is like, "Yeah, we should take this to the council." Dooku's like, "No, we push ahead. You know, why else would they send us, but to investigate and all this stuff?" And Mace Windu gets so much crap for that decision, and I don't agree with that because a he sent what word he could back to the council, and then he backed up his buddy, even though he knew his buddy was making the wrong decision. He
mhm,
went in there with them to face whatever consequences happen. I feel like that's like a true, that's a real one. He's not holding him
mhm,
back, but, like, how quickly if whatever happened was able to kill a Jedi, how quickly could that have gone bad?
mhm,
And if it went bad, what then, you know? And that's kinda how I see this. Talking to the council was the right choice. And I just love the idea of, you know, uh, there's always the trope of, follow your heart and it always works
mhm.
out. It don't always work out, you
No,
know?
because
Was the
sometimes your heart doesn't have all the information it needs, which I think was Saul's problem here. It's like he was following his heart, but he didn't have all the facts to be able to understand like the depth and consequence of all his
The heart's
decisions.
treacherous,
Mhm,
who can know it? He and we had Qui-Gon say, it was the will of the Force that he,
mhm,
trained the boy. Um, and I think so honestly thought the same. But that's the problem, and that's why I go back and forth with the Jedi's when it comes to attachment, because it doesn't mean you don't care about each other, you don't love each other, but it means
mhm,
that choice was that choice driven by the Force? Was that the Force talking to you,
mhm,
or was that you and wanting to have a pupil? And by the way, I love the introduction of that thread into it. That
mhm,
Saul really wanted a pupil
mhm,
because now Saul is the same exact person as the stranger.
mhm. Yep, yep,
And
yep, yep. Exactly.
how is Saul's any different from him in the
Mhm,
way they went about it? If anything, the stranger has been seemingly nothing but honest.
mhm.
It's a really interesting way to flip it.
Which has been kind of, I think, the great thing about the show, right, is how it's been able to balance every character with another character. I mean, we see it not just in how the episodes are structured in terms of like how they're named and titled, and like every episode has like a complementary word that is the antithesis of it, and this episode has like the previous one that complements it, but also every character's arc is another character's anti-arc,
Mhm,
so to speak. But I do definitely like how Saul is framed at the beginning of the episode because it also frames Torben. And I think that both of their framing is really interesting in terms of like how we know the Jedi from both ends of the spectrum right now, because we know for the people that read the books in the High Republic, the Jedi are presented as at the height of their glory, for
mhm,
lack of a better word, and like they're the best version of Jedi that they can be. But then we know the prequel Jedi, which is like the Jedi at their lowest. And right now, I think it's interesting to see all these characters and how they are having the characteristics of both eras. It's like, yeah, they have the nobility, the grandeur, and the acrobatics of High Republic Jedi, and in terms of their nobility, but then they also have the trappings of the arrogance and acquiescence of the prequel era Jedi. And a lot of people have been talking about how Torben reminds them of Reith Silas, and because Reith always wanted to be in the library in Coruscant. But for me, I interpreted it a little different. For me, it was more how he's the opposite of High Republic Jedi in the sense that all those Jedi want to go to the frontier, want to go to Starlight Beacon. They want to, expand the reach of the Jedi out into the galaxy and be in service of people outside of, the privileged few. And all of a sudden, like now we see Torben as we get closer to the prequel era Jedi and being like rejecting the frontier and going back to the core and just serving in the temple and not being outside in the world, which is interesting because, again, as I head back to the books, it's what's happening in the Living Force. The Living Force, for everyone
Hmm.
that hasn't read that book, is basically the Jedi
Great
Council
book.
goes out. Yeah, amazing. I really enjoyed that book. And Mundi, the MVP of the hour, makes his perfect appearance there, eating flavorless ice. But yeah,
Ju- just being
the
extremely
worst.
autistic coded
Yeah,
in that book. He's just like sitting on the floor in the middle there, he's just eating
doing
ice. You're
nothing.
like
Yeah, amazing how
Yarrow
we've come.
Poof was the
How
MVP
Real
though.
Poof is definitely, people are talking about seeing Yoda in the Acolyte, but really, yeah, sure, Yoda's gonna
Yeah,
be
we
cool,
know what's up.
but I want Gerald Poof. But yeah,
Yeah.
but then we see Living Force, like how the Jedi have become disconnected from regular people that they're supposed to be serving, and I think that Torben is representing that to that extent, and then Soul, like you said at the beginning, represents kind of like that Luke Skywalker who only sees kind of the Jedi as being that idealized version of it. It's like I'm the
Yeah.
knight in shining armor, and I just have to go and save everybody. But it's just like, yeah, you have to go and save people that need to be saved. But right now, you're only working with half a perspective. So I guess to that end, what's your because you were talking about how fandom has been vilifying all of a sudden the Jedi based on this episode. But how do you see the Jedi as it's been has as they have been recontextualized in or not recontextualized, depending on your opinion, on this show and how they relate to how they were shown in the prequels and the High Republic books?
Um, the Jedi have their have rules and regulations for a reason, and people will be like, you can say that they're stricter or whatnot, but okay, here's where I come down on. I think overall, the Jedi Order is contextualized too much as a religion by the fan base, and not enough as a vocation,
Mhm,
right? Because it's a lot like, I mean, they're space samurai. That's what they are. You know, when Obi-Wan tells Duchess Satine, "Had you asked, I would have left the Order,"
mhm,
right? I think that's the perfect summation of it. Yeah, if they're like, "Listen, you're gonna have to give your all to the galaxy. Can you do that?" And if the answer is yes, awesome, be a Jedi. If the answer is no,
mhm.
don't be a Jedi, and that's okay. It's okay to walk
To
away from the
that point,
Order.
too, a lot of people are hung up with repeating the Jedi kidnapped children, and that this show makes very clear that that is not the case. They go to parents
Mhm.
of force sensitive children and ask them to be tested and ask if they want to go into the order. But if the parents say no, it's no. Like they say, like Indara says it. It's like with your permission, of course. It's like, so it's definitely in the text of the show that Jedi do not take children unwillingly.
Yeah, absolutely. Uh, but also, the Jedi are not homogenous.
Hmm.
Right? The Jedi Council, people look at the council like it's a scary thing. Every person on the council is different. They like different things, they have different strengths, they have different weaknesses, they have different perspectives. Every single Jedi that we see in Star Wars is different.
Hmm.
And so the weird thing I think is when people will look at the mistake of this person and then say, the Jedi do this thing because that person did it. And you're like, no, the Jedi don't do that. That
Hmm.
person is not doing what the Jedi actually teach. Um, when this thing happened. And that's not to say that they're perfect or, infallible. Obviously, that's not true. But I will say, the sentiment that they're just as bad as a Sith or whatever is insane because
Hmm.
you
Hmm.
have, if you look at all the factions in Star Wars, um, the Sith are actively doing bad things for bad reasons and trying
Hmm.
to lie and destroy people because they think it's funny, right? We have the Republic who is obscenely corrupt and doing things that'll suit them at the risk of everyone else. And while they are nowhere near perfect and things can crumble around them all the time, the Jedi are at least trying their damnedest to do the right thing. And there's this balancing act that everyone has to do. And you have to look towards the future, but
Mhm.
you also can't take your eyes off the present. And sometimes they can get so wrapped up in seeing the forest that they miss the trees,
Mhm.
or
Mhm.
vice versa. It's hard to do both. It's not really possible to do both. So yeah, that's where I'm at. I feel like I've meandered there quite a bit, so I apologize.
No, I mean, I think the show, and rightfully so, because I feel the show has also, and I don't mean to say meander in a negative way, because the show I think has meander in a positive way, because that's when you're in a forest, you find your path, and I think that that's the whole point of having a Kofar and Brenda kind of be foresty planets, because
Mhm.
you are lost, and you are trying to find your path, and it is the point. You have to find find different avenues to explore everything that all these characters are exploring. So totally valid. uh, I mean, we've talked about Saul, we've talked about Torben. I think another cool thing that the show has been doing is and you mentioned it at the beginning, it's kind of tying all of Star Wars together for how much a lot of fans have been talking about how it breaks lore or breaks canon or does all or kill Star Wars. I'm just like, I think we're just watching completely different shows, because for me the show is so respectful of all of the Star
Mhm.
Wars that has come before it. I mean, I was gonna say to a fault, but not to a fault, because it's a very satisfying way to see it, because it's a love letter to the prequels. Absolutely, it definitely ties a lot to the narrative arcs of the sequels, with like how you've mentioned rightfully all the connections to the Last Jedi, uh, but also it's set in the High Republic and does all these nods to the books, especially with this
Yeah.
episode with
The
the call
hyperspace
out to
disaster.
the
Yeah.
hyperspace disaster, that I was just like, oh man, that's the legacy run right there. And it's one of
Shout
those
out to Hedda
things.
Cassett.
Hell yeah, man. But it's one of those things that for me is like really well done, because it's not distracting to the story, right? Because you could be like, this is the legacy run and the legacy run, blah blah blah, and marking row, and kind of like sidetrack the whole story to tell a plot of a book that most fans that are watching this show haven't read. And I think that the show treads very aptly in how it makes all these homages to sequel trilogy, prequel trilogy, and the books, by just like putting it out there, and it's in the subtext. And if you got it, you got it. And if you didn't, it's fine, because it doesn't, lose the
Yes.
momentum of the story moving forward. So yeah. So how have you felt that the show has done in terms of, as you mentioned, you're a big fan of like the EU and the old canon and new canon, all these things. Like, how have you felt that this show has done specifically in terms of how it's built its lore around existing Star Wars?
Uh, honestly, my favorite project has been Andor. For the TV shows, I think it's hard to get around how good the writing is on that show.
Yep. Yep.
Um, but like as far as ties to Star Wars, I don't think anything has done what this show has done.
Mm,
Because it has tied in. We have gotten things the from the EU in here. We've gotten things from the old republic. We've canonized species and stuff in there, but we've still, pulled in albinitos from the sequel trilogy,
mhm.
and we still kept them with their Beastie Boy names.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
If you're paying
Absolutely.
attention to that, which I think is just absolutely hilarious. We it's done a lot for everywhere in Star Wars, and I love the Mandalorian, but
Mhm.
the Mandalorian feels very much like it's written by original trilogy fans, and then
Mhm,
Dave
mhm,
Filoni
mhm.
will sprinkle some prequels in there from time to time.
Right.
But like that part that's very clear to me. This one, and they already told us from the very beginning that in the writers' room, Leslie Headland is an original trilogy fan
Mhm,
who also loves the expanded universe, like the tabletop RPGs. That was her bread and butter. So she got a writers' room, and in the writers' room, she's got prequels fans. She's got Dave Filoni fans, right? She's got people from each group,
mhm.
including the person who hasn't seen it, to make sure that
Right.
these moments are earned of their own accord.
Right.
Um, and I think that's paid off big time. I enjoyed the show Ahsoka, but I have a lot of problems um with the assumptions that show
Hmm.
makes.
Yep.
That show makes me write the story in my own head rather than show me or tell me it, and that bothers me. There's 10 years of story
Right.
in between these two characters that we don't ever get. There's nothing in the story that alludes to Ahsoka's relationship with Anakin
Mhm.
in any way, shape, or
Yep.
form. We just have to know it. And then when Anakin shows up in the show, it's still not even explicit enough that there's a reconciliation there. You have to write it in your head that this
Right.
is probably how she felt, and because he did this is like I wrote that in my head to make it fit. Um, and what I wrote in my head is pretty damn good, I might say, if I might say myself. But like, I don't. That's not how you do a show, in my opinion.
I will have to agree with you. Uh, Maybe if you had asked me 2 weeks ago, I might have been more on the fence about it. But one of the very fun things that I've been doing lately is my partner and I we've been watching like all the Star Wars stuff, because she's not a Star Wars fan. I mean, she's a passive fan. She's seen the movies and all these
Mhm.
things, but hasn't seen any of the Disney Plus shows. So started with Andor, did Obi-Wan Kenobi, saw the first season of Mandalorian. And now obviously we're in the middle of Acolyte, and we just finished Ahsoka. And like we've been talking about, it's like, oh, how did you connect the show? Blah blah blah, all these things. And obviously Andor has been her favorite so far, and she's really really enjoying the Acolyte. And after we finished Ahsoka, I was just like, oh, as someone who really enjoyed Ahsoka, I wanted to really know her opinion about it because
Yeah.
I'm just like, well, it's kind of hard for me to gauge, right? Because most of the people that I talk to Star Wars with, if not everyone that I talk about Star Wars with, are nerds, right? And we all know the lore, and it's
Yeah.
kind of we're all connected. We all saw the Clone Wars. We all read this and that, blah blah blah. So it's kind of hard to gauge an outsider's perspective. And thankfully, like she's an outsider. And like when we finished the show, she was like, "I think this is my least favorite," and I'm just like, "Interesting, why?" And I'm just like, I mean, the production was great, the acting was good, and all these things, but it just felt like I didn't know anything that was going on. If you hadn't been sitting next to me to explain who the hell is this and why I should care about this Ezra and blah 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 blah, I wouldn't have understood this show. This show was done for Star Wars fans. And I was just like, oh, interesting. Because for me, when I was
Mhm.
watching it, I was just like, well, the crawl explains more or less the setting. Pieces of dialogue kind of catch you up with some of the major things you need to know so that you can just hit the ground running. But obviously, that's my perspective. But to hear that, it's kind of telling. Uh, an acolyte does the opposite of that. It's like you don't need to know anything. You just come in and you come in fresh. And that's
Yeah.
why I've enjoyed a lot of the connective tissues that it has because it's the proverbial if you know, you know. None of it inhibits your enjoyment of the show. Like the Vernestra gag in the last
It's
episode.
extra. Yeah,
Right.
it's extra, it's additive, it's not required.
Right. Like, yeah, the Renaissance. Like if you read the books, you know that it's the vicious hyperspace. Blah blah blah. If you haven't read the books, then it's just a funny gag that she feels funny in hyperspace, and we can move together. But yeah, I think Acolyte has been extremely successful. I'm very very excited for next week's season finale. Hopefully not series finale. I want a season finale because I think the show has a lot of potential. I don't know if it's in terms of like continuing this story or being an anthology series, but I've definitely been enjoying it. But before we start wrapping up, obviously we're Star Wars fans and we always need to speculate, but speculate responsibly. And I think that a lot of the
Yeah.
things that this episode has done is what you mentioned at the beginning. Yeah, it answered questions X, Y, and Z, but then it introduced questions A, B, C. Now we've circled through the alphabet and all these things. And there's the question of Coral disappeared in the black mist. So where's Coral? How did May survive? Because we see that she's dropped from the bridge, and Soul rescues Osha, but we don't know how May survives. Are the witches, as the whole coven, actually dead? So lots of lingering questions now that will be answered next week. But in the meantime of waiting for next week, what do you think are some of the answers to that? And are there things that you would like to see for the finale?
Yeah, I mean, for first of all, just like you said, speculate responsibly.
Mhm,
If the thing you want to happen does not happen,
mhm,
that's okay. Uh,
mhm.
Also, don't wait for the thing you want to happen like so hard that you miss what's
Distracts what's
actually
happening.
happening.
Yep.
So, yeah, those two things are very very important. And what I always do is take my wildest theory, and me and Element Seven will make a bet. So I lost with my wild theory, so I'm gonna have to eat some of the 3x spicy ramen in a spicy ramen challenge. So we'll see how I do there. I mean, the story doesn't give us a whole lot of options. It's coming back to tell me that this is Coral. Uh, you
Mhm,
know, um, that likely, the twins were going to be bodies for Mother Anastasia and Coral, or maybe just Mother Anastasia, and then she died. And so now
mhm,
Coral needs them both in order to have her full power, or maybe she's going to try to use it as a way to bring Amelia say back or something like
mhm,
that.
mhm,
But yeah, when she becomes, when she goes ghost, like Danny Phantom, um,
mhm.
I don't believe she wasn't the one that was in Kilnaka. I think she was piecing out of there.
Yep.
But we see the way she manipulates May into
Getting
doing her
angry. Yeah.
bidding
Yep.
and getting angry and doing all this stuff. So I wonder if this isn't their first attempt. This isn't their first
Mhm,
experiment. These women were familiar with the Jedi already. Um, who knows? Maybe they encountered the Jedi before. Maybe they encountered Vernestra before, and she had a
yes.
Padawan, and they took
Yes. Yes.
her Padawan. Not before she whipped him. Uh,
Yeah. It's gonna
like
whip him again
I think
too.
when a problem comes along, you must whip it.
Yep.
Um, so that's where I'm operating is that Chimera's body is not that's not the person.
That's
And that's why she's saying well, that's why he's saying he's been around for a long, long
yep.
time.
It's funny that you say that because I was talking to my girlfriend after yesterday after this episode was over, and that was her theory. She's like, "You have to talk about my theory on the episode because I think I'm right." So I think she's going to be very happy to know that you are on board with her about Chimere
Yeah.
actually being Coral.
Again, I do think it goes back to essence transfer, and I think that's a
Mhm,
fantastic way to tie things back into this A, the sequel trilogy, and B, the Darth Bane trilogy,
mhm,
because he finds that out through the holocron of Darth Undeadu. And when he yeah, that's a whole another thing. Don't want to get involved with that yet. But what OSHA needs is different. OSHA responds differently, and Coral already knows this. So
mhm,
she's responding to OSHA the way that, Mother Anastasia would have,
mhm.
in order to tempt her into whatever she's doing.
Right.
Um, I wonder if some kind of way the helmet, the Cortosis helmet, makes it easier to get into someone's consciousness.
Yeah.
But I know we'll have to wait and see.
It's definitely gonna be a wild ride because it's yeah, so many threads, no pun intended. You know that the show has set up that it's gonna be interesting to see what is answered. Because if I'm not mistaken, I think Leslie has said that some things won't be answered because I think she has mentioned
Yeah.
that there's things that she would want to explore in a second season. And I'm just like, oh, that's cold. Like, come on, you can't assume you're gonna have a second
But
season unless you know you're getting a second season.
what one thing she did say, she was like, I will make it so that there's a satisfying conclusion,
Mhm,
but there'll be open threads. Um, Here's what I want: no second season.
mhm,
Give me the added threads in a comic or in a book,
mhm,
but put Leslie Headland on something else. Give her Jolie Bendo in the Old Republic.
Mhm.
as a character and let us follow his journey or something like that. Give her more stuff, you know. Um, but that's where I'm at with it.
I totally agree. Like I think that what I'm most excited, yeah, for next episode, obviously besides the the answers to why were the twins made and all these things, it's how Vernestra, I think, is the missing piece to a lot of this because she's always been in the background, right? She's always been following all the action and being uh, tracking everything. And with the last episode with the whip, you know, at that point it's a cameo of the whip. I feel like there's a lot more to her that we don't know about in terms of like how she connects to the larger tapestry of this show, and I'm definitely looking forward to see like how she connects back into the series in a more active way, which makes me wonder if there's still some flashback to explore because I don't feel that with today's episode we got all of the truth. I feel like we got like
Hmm.
a lot more context, obviously, than we did on episode 3, but we still didn't. I don't feel like we got all of it yet. So I think that
Yeah.
there's some component to it that I think maybe it's either Chimere or Vernestra is gonna add to finish the story because I feel yeah we've gotten two POVs, but now we need the lowercase t truth. I don't think we're gonna get the capital T truth, but at least get to some semblance of what everything means to everybody. And then obviously the big thing for me is Kylo Ren's theme. We obviously
Right?
heard it
That's mm,
in night. We
three
heard it
times. We've heard it
again.
three times.
We heard it again last week. We heard, and then we heard it two times in this episode. So I'm just like, it's definitely on purpose. It's not an accident. And Leslie has confirmed that it's there for a reason. So I'm just like, what does it mean? So I hope that in the finale we get some answers to a lot of this. I kind of don't want it to be Chimeras a Night of Ren. I don't know. That one doesn't float my boat. How do you what's your theory on the Kylo Ren theme and how it connects to the show?
I mean, I in the Rise of Skywalker visual dictionary, right? We find out the Knights of Ren have existed for centuries,
Mhm.
as marauders, and who's to say what exactly that ends up looking like? It could be, he could end up being the first Ren, and he
Mhm.
adopts the name from this group of marauders and turns it into his own force, dark side biker gang or whatever. Um,
Right.
uh, I I feel like if he doesn't die, that's the obvious direction he's got to go in,
Mhm.
because from what he says, he doesn't sound like a Sith,
Mhm.
right? He says, some might call me Sith." He says,
Right. He's
um,
coy about how he put that out there.
but he says he has no name. He says all he wants is freedom. Like, Sith are very proud of their names. They have names. They don't want freedom. They,
And I think
you know what I mean?
that's the interesting thing too of the marketing around him because when they put like oh when Lucasfilm has put out all the images of Chimera, they don't call him Chimera, they call him the Stranger. So I'm just like that's and they don't call him the Stranger in the show. And it's like that there's
Yeah.
very purposeful that the marketing for his character has been the Stranger. So that means that there's something afoot with his background that might not be the answers that we might expect.
So okay, so here's what I'm calling. Leslie Headland is a Naruto fan,
Mhm.
and that's what we're watching. Um, that the Sith are brown, and they're being like Orochimaru, and they have these science experiments set up in different places so that people who crave power will do this thing, and
Mhm.
then they can like be in the shadows and like take notes of being like, yeah, that didn't work. And coming at the end of the day, and there's someone pulling up streams. I've been saying Keimer is Obito, because we literally saw him as Toby before, and then he becomes Obito, um, and we have to wait for the series Madara. I
Mhm.
think
Mhm.
that the purpose of this show was to answer what the Sith were doing in that 1,000 years when they were supposedly hidden. People have been mad because they haven't seen Sith. Give me Sith, let me
Mhm.
see Sith, and I have the opposite take. I'm like, they're hiding.
Right, 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 right.
So what they're doing is amassing power, amassing information, amassing techniques, amassing wealth. Um, and I think of specifically the Darth Bane book, where Xana would go infiltrate a group that was going to get big enough to tip the scales, as it were,
Mhm,
to become an actual player in the galaxy to upset because they knew, well, we can't fight two enemies at the same time. So
mhm,
they would go to these groups, make them rush their plan or destroy them in some way to manipulate the state of the galaxy so that when they were ready, they were ready.
mhm.
And I think that's what's happening here.
It's exciting. That and I think that's the thing that I am most passionate about with the Acolyte is, as much as I loved Andor, we it's set in the Imperial time frame, so we kind of
Yeah.
and we know how the characters end in Rogue One, so there's the familiar with Andor that I think is it's fine, but it's comfortable to an extent as much as
Yeah.
I love it. But with Acolyte, what's
But this
exciting for
is
me
this
is
is
that
High Republic.
it's you don't know anything,
Anyone can die at any
right?
point for any reason.
I
No
mean,
one is safe.
and the what better example of that than episode 5 night when not only does the Jord Horde get cut short by by his getting his neck twisted beyond its capacity, but also Jackie also meeting her demise. So it's just like the two characters that you think are absolutely safe are not, and then Kalnaka's also gone, and Dara's gone. It's just like everyone's on the shopping block next week, and I
Yeah.
think not because I'm a masochist, but it's exciting because it means that there's a lot of avenues for this show to go to that are fresh and creative, and doesn't have to be limited by anything because there's the road is completely open for it. But
Oh, I do have a final question for you though.
oh please,
Um, maybe two of them. There's been a Chekhov's gun
yeah,
this entire series, and that Chekhov's gun has been May blocks and OSHA doesn't.
yeah, yeah,
How do you
yeah.
think that's going to factor into the next episode?
Well, for me, it's odd because with and it's one of those things that I think is interesting too with marketing because, and I swear I'm gonna answer your question, but I need to do a tangent. One of the interesting things that the marketing for the show has done is like all the artwork that they've been releasing weekly by Marco Manev, and like the artwork has been beautiful. But then the artwork is always framed with the eclipse, right? And that's the eclipse that's always
Hmm.
the logo for the acolyte of the I mean everyone knows what an eclipse is, so I won't describe it. But the cool thing about the posters, like the sequencing, right? Of like the eclipse is happening and then the eclipse is subsiding. So that's what we're seeing with May and Osha's characterization to an extent, particularly Osha. I hope that we see more of it with May in the next episode, but with Osha, we've seen that she's very clearly in the light. Even when we see her and she's in Brendock, she's dressed in her civilian clothes in white, but now she's getting the reversal. So we see that she's tempted by the dark side, by Chimere, and not ahch-to, and dressed like Ray in gray. So she's starting to have that shift. I would hope to see that now with May, even though May has had that wardrobe change too, where she was in dark garbs and now she's with the light garbs that Osha had, but she still hasn't had the emotional light side, dark side switch. So I wonder if like that's something that's gonna happen with them where they don't fully switch right to light or dark. They stay balanced because they're meeting each other halfway, so to speak, and it's a way that they work together to be able
Hmm.
to use their ability or lack thereof to complement each other. Uh, so yeah, I'm not sure that it's gonna happen that way, but I do think that their role reversal is gonna play into like how they tap into the force in some way that's gonna help them together. But I'm usually wrong with these things, and I kind of like being wrong though because what these writers come up with is definitely better than than any theory I can surmise. What about you? What do you think that there's gonna be like a payoff there?
I haven't figured out what I think it's gonna be yet. I mean, I think uh well, okay, so what's gonna happen is an attack is gonna be launched at OSHA,
Mhm,
and OSHA is not gonna block it, but she's gonna dodge it, and it's going to hit something
mhm,
behind her, and then that thing will be what wins.
mhm, mhm.
That's what's gonna happen. And then and I should be like, "Remember, I never block," or something like that.
Mhm.
And then you're gonna
Some
go,
quip, yeah.
"Ah,
It's
yay."
like, now I remember. And I mean, and I
That's what
think
I'm
that
assuming.
and something like that would absolutely make sense to me because again, I think that one of the strengths of this show has been tying everything up. It's like everything has like something that it sets something up and it pays it off. So I think that I mean, even with this episode, like you can split the series right in the middle, and the series is symmetrical. You know, where kind of the episode before last is the flashback, and the sec. I mean, technically it's the third episode, but we got both the first and the second together. So the second
Yeah.
episode that we got to see was the flashback. So it kind of ends the same way. So I think that a lot of our answers might be in those first two episodes in terms of like how it's going to end because the show I think we can kind of watch it from the middle out and see like it's kind of the opposite end of our viewing experience. So I think that's going to be my homework for next week is watching one and
Okay.
two to see what answers might be there for how this is going to end. I mean, maybe it ends in the Neimoidian ship and that's where the final battle is. And that's how it ties it back together. It's just at the Neimoidian ship. But who knows? Eh, but you know, it's one of those things where we can be speculating wildly forever because we're Star Wars fans and we have theories aplenty. But there's always a time to uh, call it. And I think, like for today, I think this has been a great conversation for a great episode. Where like now, like the anxiety is through the roof, waiting for the next one. So, Darth, thank you so much for joining us. This has been such a wonderful, wonderful chat. Definitely very illuminating different points of view. But before we sign off, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you have going on? What can people listening be expecting from you and the content you're making? Just yeah, tell us what we can expect from Darth Choco moving forward.
Well, I mean, I got two things the works that I actually can't talk about.
Oh,
But,
spicy.
um, uh, beyond that, no, just more awesome content. I think it's awesome. We will be branching out a lot more because I do also watch a lot of anime. I do also love other mediums, and with the acolyte, you know, kind of wrapping up, I'm going
Mhm.
to start promoting a lot of other types of content as well. So if you're an all-purpose nerd, come follow me and check it out. Once again, Darth Choco on TikTok, Darth Choco on YouTube, and Darth Choco on uh, Twitter. But I don't know. I might switch to Threads. Just less Nazis.
Threads is well, absolutely, and I always liken it to Galen Erso in Rogue One. It's just it's
So it's a peaceful
when
life.
Yeah,
Yeah.
when Krennic says like, "Oh, man of your talents, it must be a lonely life," and he's like, "It's peaceful," and that's how it feels. I go to Twitter just to like see what drama's happening, but I live on Threads. I just visit
Hmm.
on Twitter nowadays, but yeah. Great content. We'll leave links down in the description below so that all of you that are listening can make sure to just go rush now and just follow. There's great content. We have to support each other because Star Wars fans must be unified in terms of supporting fans and diverse opinions and not banishing each other because we didn't agree with one take or the other. But again, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a lovely, lovely time, and I hope to talk to you in the future at some point. But
Yeah.
with that, thank you so much. We have been Triad of the Force. If you like what you've heard, please make sure to follow us on our socials. We're on Threads, Instagram, Blue Sky, even though we don't use it, and Twitter. So follow us on those in your platform of preference. The links are in the description below. If you would want to see our face for some reason, we are on YouTube. So please make sure to subscribe down there and hit that bell for notifications. Boost the algorithm by leaving a comment. If you're going to leave a negative comment, please feel free to do so. because it boosts the engagement, even though I will not respond to you. If you want to support us, we have a TeePublic where we have a bunch of T-shirts that you can buy. Every little bit helps. But with that, thank you for joining our Acolyte discussion series for Light and Life, and may the Force be with you.